There's a haunting kind of silence that shapes the children who grow up ignored. You can't see it on their faces, not right away. It hides behind polite smiles, quiet voices, and the constant feeling of being too much or not enough. These children learn early that the world doesn't always listen, that sometimes love doesn't arrive even when they deserve it. So they begin to shrink, not physically, but emotionally, folding themselves into smaller and smaller spaces until they almost disappear. They walk into classrooms, workplaces, relationships, and they carry an invisible rule. Don't take up space. Don't expect to be noticed, because deep down, they've been taught that attention is something earned, not something owed. And when you grow up believing that, you spend your life chasing acknowledgment like it's oxygen. Psychologists call this an internalized neglect schema, a quiet programming of the mind that says, your needs are a burden. It's not a thought you consciously repeat, it's a pattern etched into your nervous system. You anticipate being dismissed before you even speak. You expect your feelings to go unseen, your efforts to go unnoticed. And with time, that expectation becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The child who was once ignored becomes the adult who hides their joy, who swallows their pain, who apologizes for simply existing. This isn't weakness, it's adaptation. The brain, in its desperate attempt to protect you, builds walls where there should have been warmth. It teaches you to survive silence, even if it means silencing yourself. But here's the part no one talks about. Being ignored doesn't just teach you to go quiet, it teaches you to observe. The ignored child becomes a watcher. They see everything, the shifts in people's tone, the micro-expressions, the pauses between words. They learn to read a room before they even enter it. And that hyper-awareness, though born from pain, becomes a strange sort of power. It's empathy forged in the fires of absence. They sense what others feel before those feelings are spoken. But the cost of that gift is exhaustion. Because when you're always scanning the world for signs of rejection, your mind never rests. Your body stays in quiet defense mode, heart steady on the outside, but racing beneath the surface. And that's what emotional neglect does. It doesn't destroy the person, it rewires them to survive in environments where love feels uncertain. Many adults who grew up ignored mistake calm for danger, peace for a warning sign. They brace themselves even when nothing's wrong. They've learned that silence often comes before the storm, so they never stop preparing for one. But healing means unlearning that preparation, reminding yourself that not every quiet moment is the beginning of pain. And yet, what's even more tragic and more beautiful is how resilient that child's heart remains. Even after years of invisibility, they still crave connection. They still hope to be seen. They still look for meaning in the eyes of others, even if they've been disappointed 100 times before. Because somewhere deep inside, a spark refuses to die. That spark is the truth of who they are, someone worthy of love, acknowledgement, and belonging. Psychology shows that neglect rewires the brain's stress systems, yes, but it doesn't erase the capacity for healing. Every ignored child carries within them the potential to rebuild what was broken. Healing begins the moment they stop waiting for someone else to see them and start learning to see themselves. It's not easy. It feels unnatural at first when you've spent years erasing yourself. Visibility can feel terrifying. But every small act of acknowledgement, celebrating your own victories, voicing your own emotions, setting boundaries without guilt, becomes a rebellion against the silence that once defined you. And in that rebellion lies freedom. Because the truth is, invisibility is not destiny. You are not the absence of love you received. You are the presence of every moment you decide to show up for yourself. The ignored child grows into the adult who listens deeply, who feels profoundly, who refuses to let others fade the way they once did. And in that choice, in that quiet, steady decision to be seen, they transform their pain into power. They become living proof that even silence can give birth to strength, that even neglect can teach compassion, and that the smallest light once seen can illuminate an entire life.
When you grow up ignored, the silence becomes familiar, almost comforting. It wraps around you like a blanket that's too heavy to take off, but too familiar to throw away. You start mistaking that silence for safety. You tell yourself you prefer to be alone, that solitude feels easier, cleaner, more peaceful. But deep down, it isn't peace you're feeling, it's avoidance. Because reaching for connection feels dangerous when you've learned that every outstretched hand might be left hanging. Ignored children often grow up into adults who confuse distance with independence. They'll say things like, "I don't need anyone," or "I'm fine on my own." But underneath those words is a quiet ache. The ache of someone who once needed too much and was met with too little. It's easier to build a wall than to risk the sting of invisibility again. Psychologists call this avoidant attachment. It's not coldness, it's protection. The heart learns to hide behind logic. The mind learns to suppress the need for closeness. But no matter how high the walls are built, the need to be seen never disappears. It just waits, patient, persistent, and hungry. And when that wall finally cracks, maybe through love, loss, or therapy, all those unmet needs flood back like water through a broken dam. The adult who thought they had outgrown their childhood suddenly finds themselves crying over small rejections, over moments of being overlooked. It feels irrational, but it's not. It's the inner child finally speaking after years of silence. And that voice doesn't want to be quiet anymore. It wants to be heard. You see, emotional neglect is deceptive. It doesn't wound you with scars. It erases parts of you slowly, quietly, until you no longer recognize yourself. It teaches you to silence your excitement, to mute your opinions, to dim your light. Over time, you stop showing up as who you are and start showing up as who you think others will tolerate. That's the tragedy of neglect. It doesn't just steal love, it steals authenticity. But here's what psychology and lived experience teaches us. What's learned can be unlearned. The same brain that once adapted to survive neglect can rewire itself to trust love again. It's not easy, but it's possible. Healing begins the moment you stop blaming yourself for the silence you grew up in. The child you were didn't deserve to be ignored, and the adult you are doesn't have to repeat that pattern. Sometimes healing looks like small defiance, sending a message when you want to withdraw, speaking up when you feel the urge to stay silent, letting someone comfort you, even when it feels unfamiliar. Every one of these moments tells your nervous system connection is safe now. Over time, the body learns that being seen doesn't equal pain. It equals life. But there's another side to the ignored child, one that's often overlooked. They become incredible listeners, extraordinary friends, and deeply empathetic partners. Because when you felt invisible, You never want anyone else to feel that way. You listen deeply. You notice details others miss. You make people feel understood. And that's beautiful. But it can also be draining, because in giving so much understanding to others, you can forget to give any to yourself. So many ignored children grow up and find themselves surrounded by people, yet still feeling unseen. That's because connection without reciprocity doesn't heal. It repeats the wound. You can spend years being everyone's shoulder to cry on and still feel empty inside. Healing isn't about being needed, it's about being known. The ignored child must learn something that feels almost radical: self-acknowledgment. To sit quietly, place a hand over your heart, and say, "I see you." It sounds simple, almost silly, but it's not. It's the act of reparenting, giving yourself the attention you were denied. Neuroscientists call this self-directed compassion, and studies show it literally changes the brain's emotional regulation centers. When you validate your own feelings, you build the internal foundation you were missing. You become both the listener and the listened to. And that's where the true transformation begins. The moment an ignored child, now an adult, learns to witness themselves, they reclaim power. Because invisibility loses its grip when you start seeing yourself clearly. Suddenly, you're not just reacting to life, you're participating in it. You speak up, you draw boundaries, you express joy without apology. And each act of expression tells your subconscious, "I exist and I matter." Still, the journey isn't linear. Healing from emotional neglect often comes with relapses, moments when silence feels safer, when self-doubt returns, when you question if you're worth the effort. But that's okay. Growth isn't about never falling back into old patterns. It's about noticing when you do and choosing, even softly, to step forward again. Every time you choose connection over avoidance, honesty over hiding, you're rewriting the script your childhood left behind. Let's not forget something crucial. Most neglect wasn't born from cruelty, but from pain passed down. Many parents who ignore their children do so because they were ignored themselves. Emotional unavailability runs in families like an invisible inheritance. You can't give what you never received. But when you begin to understand this, something shifts. Compassion enters the picture. You realize healing isn't just about blaming those who failed you. It's about ending the pattern so no one else inherits that silence. And maybe that's the hidden purpose of all this pain: to create people who break the cycle. The ignored child, once healed, often becomes the parent who listens deeply, the friend who checks in, the partner who notices small things that others overlook. Their empathy becomes their legacy. Because they know what it's like to be unseen, they make seeing others their life's quiet mission. Still, that mission must include seeing yourself. Because true empathy doesn't come from emptiness, it comes from wholeness. You can't pour from a wound, you have to pour from a well. That's why acknowledging your own story, even the painful parts, is so essential. It's not self-pity, it's self-connection. So maybe healing isn't about rewriting the past. Maybe it's about understanding it. Looking back, not to dwell, but to integrate. To say, yes, that happened. Yes, it shaped me, but it doesn't own me anymore. The ignored child inside you doesn't disappear when you heal. They just stop running the show. They become part of your story, not the whole story. And in that integration, something beautiful happens. Peace. Not the empty silence of being unseen, but the calm silence of self-trust. A stillness that says, I no longer need to earn love. I already have it within me. Because in the end, the psychology of the ignored child is not just a story of pain, it's a story of rebirth. It's the reminder that the same mind once shaped by neglect can be reshaped by care. The same heart that learned to hide can learn to open again. The same child who once whispered for attention can grow up into an adult who speaks with power, clarity, and compassion. And maybe that's the real miracle. Not that they survived silence, but that they learned to turn it into strength.